How's it going, guys? I am Folkerman, your local brick build historian. Today we're taking a look at a Brickmania kit for another episode of Brick Build History. Today we're finally going into the American realm. I realize I have completely skipped past all my American stuff and thought I'll begin it with the very famous P-40. This is one of the fighters that it's got a interesting history, especially when it comes to the fact that it wasn't always loved. Especially like right after the war, people kind of gave it a lot of crap for being, underpowered, not being able to keep up with the German fighters or even the British fighters, and it was like just underpowered, underarmed, and all that. But it actually proved to be a pretty good fighter once you take off the glasses of criticism and actually look at the aircraft for the way it is. But with that said, you can probably see that there's two of them behind there, and I'll get to that in a second. But the first thing we should do is take a look at the box. So this is the P-40B Warhawk World War II fighter, 465 Lego elements and a custom minifig. You have a nice colored view of the front here. This is the Flying Tigers livery, which you'll see I actually didn't choose. This one's designed by Cody Osell. You have the manufacturing plate here with all the same information. This is kit 2290, skill level 4.5. I have number 132. And then you have a monochromatic image from the side. And it's got the landing gear folded up and in the back there too. You get a really nice view of the tiger mouth. But anyway, let's move that to the side and take a look at these kits. So not only do I have the B model here, but I have the N model as well, which is the earlier version. And I got this from the vault, so I don't have the box for it, but I bought it from the vault with the instructions and all that. So it's they're both very similar, especially in the back portion. It's got like the same exact rear fuselage. The wings are virtually the same. Really the only difference with this here is the wheels. This uses a pneumatic T-joint, and you have to take the wheel off. I'm too lazy to do it on video, but you basically have to take the wheel off, move it, like put it backwards and fold it up. While this one you can just turn and fold, which I kind of like better, in all honesty. And then besides that, the front is different a little bit. You can see this is a little chunkier, for lack of a better term. It's got a lot of chunk to it, and it's got this cool ridge going up on the top there, which I believe is for the air cooler, because the radiator is down here, which I'll get into with the history. As you can see, both of them have the tiger mouth painted on the front, or shark mouth painted on the front. This one has printed parts and some stickers, and then this one is pure sticker, which I kind of like the printed parts a little bit more. And I chose to do the American U.S. Army Air Force version of the P-40B, because I kind of like having like planes that I can keep together. So if I made this the AVG version, or the American Volunteer Group, then it's like kind of by itself, and I don't want to keep it away from its brother, so I chose to put the American markings on it. It's a pretty stable plane, and the way that this dihedral is achieved, I'm not one to give away secrets, but man, that dihedral is quite an interesting way of getting it, and it's still pretty strong. I wouldn't do that often, but I mean, it keeps its dihedral pretty good. Other than that, it's just a nice kit to look at, especially having that shark mouth. Like, everyone loves a shark mouth. It's just a really iconic image of this aircraft. And, you know, the one thing I like this version better than this is having the smaller pistons of the engine, because this kind of, like, when it flares out, it's a little ridiculous looking at the end here, because it's like poking out so far. I don't know, that's just a personal preference. Besides all that, I would say if you missed out on the restock of this, it sucks, because I think they just retired it. Even like they just restocked it and it sold out, and I think they just retired it. So if you missed out, I feel sorry for you, because this is a really fun kit. Fun to build, fun to swoosh around. Only thing is, if you want your pilot in there, build it in there, because getting that canopy on and off is a pain in the half, if I do say so myself. But with that said, let's go into the history. So the P-40 Warhawk was originally designed as a improvement of the P-36, which was just called the Hawk. The P-36 was really one of the first American aircraft to be like deemed a modern aircraft. It was pretty popular whenever it first came out. It had like retractable landing gear, had 250 caliber machine guns in the cowling, I believe, and used a radial engine. It was fast, sleek, modern, all that. Had hydraulic flaps, and so on and so forth. Well, eventually they found out that it was quite inferior to other aircrafts, like say the BF-109 that just came out, and the Typhoon, or not the Typhoon, the Hurricane and the Spitfire. So Curtiss decided to look into improving the design. If you don't know, the Curtiss, which is the Curtiss-Wright Corporation, is the company founded by Glenn Curtiss. And if you don't know who Glenn Curtiss was, basically he was the guy who was the second American to fly, and where the Wright brothers failed to improve their designs and stay relevant, Glenn Curtiss would go and just make a business out of aviation. I think he made J4 Jennies as well during World War I, but his company would continue on into the 1930s and 1940s. So this was the what his company would come up with for World War II. So in 1938, the Curtiss-Wright company would look into their P-36 design and decide, okay, what was good and what do we need to improve on. One thing they decided they needed to improve on was the armament. So originally, the original P-40s would have the 250s in the cowling, and then they added 130 caliber or 1303 caliber, depending on if it was Lend-Lease or not, in the wing. And then the P-40B model, which is this one, would add a second 30 caliber on each wing, giving it a grand total of 6 guns. One of the other things they did was they moved on from the Pratt & Whitney R1830 radial engine to the Allison V1710 V12 engine. And one thing they figured out was like the radial engines, they're good for saving weight and making it air cooled so you don't have to rely on a radiator, but they're also, the bigger they get, like the more power you need, the bigger they get, and the wider the diameter is. And also, for it to be air cooled, it has to be basically showing all pistons in the front, meaning that you can't really make it streamlined. So what the Curtis company did was they put a V12 in, and they made it more streamlined to make it more aerodynamic, which makes it go faster. Originally they had the radiator scoop in the back, like towards the back, but realized it was a lot better to put it in the front here, which kind of allowed it to get the shark mouth opening in the front and make it look really cool. So one of the things about the naming is, if you're in, say, Britain or Russia, you probably know this as the Tomahawk. And then this one would be the Kitty Hawk. So it's kind of a weird naming convention between the two, between America and the Lend-Lease countries that we gave these to. Because in America we call these Warhawks. All the models are called Warhawks. But in Britain, the Commonwealth, and the Soviet Union, these are the Tomahawks, the P-40 through the P-40 Charlie model, and then the Kitty Hawks were the P-40 Delta model onwards, so which includes the N here. Why they're different, I don't exactly know, but it's just a weird naming convention between the two, between us and the countries we put these out to with Lend-Lease. Speaking of which, the first combat that the P-40 would see for World War II would be in the Middle East in 1941 and Northern Africa, basically that like Suez area. The 112th Squadron of the RAF, Royal Air Force, were actually the first ones to put this shark mouth on the P-40s. They actually took that from some Luftwaffe Bf-110s that I guess would have the shark mouth too, which I honestly didn't know about, and they just adapted it to the P-40 here. One of the biggest problems, which is one of the biggest criticisms of the P-40, was, well, at least in the beginning, was its lack of a supercharger, or two-speed supercharger. So I talk about superchargers all the time, but basically the supercharger only had one speed, which means that you can't make it go faster the higher you go, which is a big problem. So its high altitude capabilities were severely lacking, at least at first, and then whenever I don't remember exactly what model, I think it was the E model, where they started actually putting two stages in the Warhawk, and they also put Merlin engines in, which, if you're any kind of aviation enthusiast, you know about the Merlin engine and how it's basically the God-given engine for any piston aircraft. So that was a big knock into its legacy, was the fact that people really gave it a lot of crap for not having that two-speed supercharger. But in places like the Pacific Theater, it actually wasn't that big of an issue. And eventually, whenever in Europe, whenever the air superiority was kind of already established, it did perfectly fine as well. But it really kind of had a bad light when it came to its power. Another thing that it got criticism for was having the 30 cals in the wings, which, to be fair, so did the Spitfire, and the Hurricane, and basically every other aircraft had some kind of 7mm caliber machine guns. At least it had the 250s in the nose. Eventually, when it gets to this end model, it would have the standard American 350s in the wings. Also, the end model would put racks, one rack on each wing, whether it's for bombs or for drop tanks. But for as much criticism as it got a lot of praise, especially from the pilots. The pilots absolutely loved this little thing. One thing they loved was just how durable it was, and you could just take a beating. Like the like whenever it went up against the Japanese, the Mitsubishi fighters, yeah, they could go circles around you, but it takes one bullet and it's going down. All these things, it takes about like 2 fighters worth of ammo to bring one down. So, you know, that's a plus. Soviets also really like that aspect because they're Soviets and they like their planes to be tanks. By the end of its run, from like 1939 to 1944, 13,738 would be built, and in 1944, one P-40 cost $44,892, which is not bad at all, especially for a pretty decent fighter. Really, it, other than engine change and armament change, like you probably see how they got rid of the 2 nose 50s here, which it would be cool having the 2 nose 50s and 3 on the wings. Just absolute wall of lead. Doesn't really change that much. You know, they put new engines in, they kind of changed the airframe a little bit, they add self-sealing tanks between the original P-40 models going on into the P-40 Bravos and Novembers. Like, that was actually one of the biggest changes. Adding armor. There was one P-40N type where they like got rid of most of the armor, only had 2 50s on each wing, and it could reach like 395 miles per hour, which is like the fastest P-40 that they've made. P-40N also changed the canopy a little bit. It's not really shown off in this model, but they did change the canopy to make it more have more visibility, because it would stay this Razorback configuration its entire life. They did kinda try a bubble canopy setup, which if you've seen the P-51s, they had bubble canopies with their D models, but they tried a bubble canopy setup with a P-40N, and they decided, we'll just keep it the way it is. And yeah, so the Warhawk would actually stay in service until 1958 with the Brazilian Air Force, before it would be fully retired in military service. So once you think about that, 20 years for an aircraft like this is pretty darn good, especially for a time period where like World War II, where you go from the P-38, the P-40, the P-47, the P-51, and that's just the Army fighters. P-47, you know, like that's just the Army fighters. Not to mention the fact that you have all the whole plethora of Navy fighters that they went through. Like it seemed like every year or so, a new fighter came out to push the envelope. But either way, this thing would last for a very long time, and you know, it's just one of those very iconic aircraft, especially with the shark mouth. It definitely isn't the only one with the shark mouth, but whenever you think of an aircraft that has a shark mouth, you always see the P-40. So, you know, despite how you feel about the P-40, you can't deny the fact that it is one of the most important fighters to come out of the American factories. And, you know, it did its own. It held enemies at bay, helped not only be a brilliant fighter, but it was also a great fighter bomber. I mean, the Allies would use this to do some bombing raids down into places like Burma and all that, and it's really just an overall great aircraft. So, with that said, if you liked the video, hit a like. Go ahead and comment anything that you think I missed. And if you want to see more of these, go ahead and subscribe. I have a lot of extra aircraft to look at. And I know people have been wanting to see the P-40 for a little bit of time, so tell me what you want to see. With that said, I've been Fulkerman, and this has been me building history.